The courtroom atmosphere, a legend in uncharted territory. The courtroom was alive with the hum of anticipation, a palpable energy that seemed to buzz in the air. Outside the windows, reporters from every major outlet crowded the courthouse steps, cameras poised, microphones ready to capture the moment. The streets were teeming with curious onlookers who had heard the rumors Michael Jordan, the living basketball legend, was about to take on the legal system itself. Inside, the usual clinking of gavels and shuffling of papers seemed strangely quiet. The moment felt different. The benches were filled not just by lawyers and jurors, but by ordinary people who had come simply because they knew this wasn't any typical courtroom drama. This was Michael Jordan, the man who had soared through the air for decades, defying gravity on the basketball court, was now standing at the plaintiff's table, ready to face a challenge far more complex than anything he had ever encountered before. It wasn't a basketball opponent that he would be facing today, but a real estate developer who had illegally encroached upon his land. The case, a simple property dispute on the surface, had already become something much more. The land in question was in a prime location in Chicago, an area Michael had once purchased for peace and privacy, but now a developer named Victor Henderson had decided that Jordan's land was prime real estate for a new luxury development. Without permission or consultation, Henderson had begun building on Michael's property. Jordan had tried to resolve the matter quietly, sending formal requests, letters, and even contacting his attorneys. But when those pleas were ignored, there was no choice but to take the matter to court. And so, here he was, Michael Jordan, the icon who had defined a generation, now sitting before a judge and a jury. But there was something different in the air today. The courtroom wasn't just filled with legal professionals. It was filled with people who knew Michael Jordan only as a basketball legend. For them, the man who once seemed invincible on the court might seem out of his element here. The atmosphere crackled with uncertainty, and yet Jordan's presence seemed to command the room. Despite the whispers circulating around the room, the snide comments from those who didn't believe he could win, Michael remained eerily calm. His sharp, piercing gaze seemed to see through every onlooker, every doubt. Even as the defense team prepared their case, the usual pretrial chatter was quieter than usual. Everyone was waiting for something. A misstep, a mistake, a sign that the great Michael Jordan was human after all. But they were about to see something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a case. This wasn't even just about a lawsuit. This was Michael Jordan's next challenge, one where the stakes were higher than any championship game he'd ever played. The court watched him, and they waited, not knowing that they were about to witness the beginning of a new kind of greatness. Judge's initial mockery. The underestimation of a legend. As the courtroom settled, all eyes were fixed on the judge, Eleanor Hughes. A woman who had spent decades overseeing the most complex legal battles, she was accustomed to handling high-profile cases with a steady hand and a sharp mind. To her, every trial followed a predictable rhythm. The players entered, the arguments were presented, and the case would unfold according to the established laws of the land. She had seen celebrities, athletes, and the wealthy wade into her courtroom before, each one believing their fame or fortune could somehow tilt the scales of justice in their favor. But none of them had been Michael Jordan. None had been a legend in his own right, whose very name was synonymous with dominance. To Judge Hughes, Michael Jordan's decision to represent himself felt more like a publicity stunt than a serious legal endeavor. She watched as he stood tall at the plaintiff's table, his posture as commanding as it had been on the basketball court. His eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the room with an almost quiet intensity. His face, usually lit up with the competitive fire of a champion athlete, now bore a calm and measured expression. It was the kind of calm that made those around him uneasy, as if they knew something monumental was about to unfold. But the judge wasn't concerned. In her eyes, this would be nothing more than an interesting diversion. A rich, famous man trying to tackle something he knew little about. With a thin smile, Judge Hughes leaned forward and addressed Michael, tapping her gavel lightly for attention. "Mr. Jordan," she began, her tone laced with a subtle amusement, "I understand you've chosen to represent yourself in this matter." She paused for a moment, letting the words settle in the room. "I have to ask, do you really think this is like one of your basketball games, that you can simply step onto this court and dominate?" The words hit the air with a slight ripple of laughter. It wasn't mocking laughter yet, but the tone was unmistakably dismissive. There were chuckles from the gallery, some light-hearted, others bordering on condescending. The defense lawyer, Gregory Roberts, a man well-versed in corporate litigation, exchanged glances with his colleagues, all of them smiling at the thought of Jordan fumbling through legal jargon like an amateur. Even the judge could sense their quiet approval. They had seen this before. The athlete who thought his fame would grant him special treatment, the celebrity who couldn't understand the weight of real legal processes. Michael stood silently, allowing the laughter to die down. His face remained stoic, unaffected. There was no sign of the indignation that others might have felt in this situation. Instead, he seemed to be waiting for something, waiting for the world to understand that this was not some game, not some publicity stunt. This was his life, his property, and he would treat it with the seriousness it deserved. Judge Hughes, sensing that the moment was hers to control, continued. "Tell me, Mr. Jordan," she asked, raising an eyebrow, "where did you study law? I assume you're well versed in the nuances of property law." The words came with a slight chuckle, as if she were expecting him to stammer, to admit that this wasn't his world. The laughter in the room grew louder, but Michael remained unmoved. He didn't flinch or shift in his seat. His blue eyes locked onto the judge's, and for the first time, the room seemed to hold its breath. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of neatly organized legal documents. Each page was perfectly aligned, carefully prepared. The work of a man who had spent countless hours poring over the law, studying every detail with precision. "I've spent the last 6 months reviewing every property law that applies to this case," Michael said, his voice calm, even measured. "I've read the local zoning codes, studied precedent, and I have all the evidence to prove that my land has been unlawfully encroached upon." The murmurs in the room quieted. The chuckles faded into an uneasy silence. This wasn't a man stumbling over his words. This wasn't someone unprepared, playing at being a lawyer. This was a man who had studied the law and come prepared. His voice, steady and unwavering, cut through the tension in the room. "I didn't come here for theatrics. I came here to present the truth. If this court is about justice, then let's get to it." Judge Hughes was taken aback, her expression shifting ever so slightly. She had expected Michael to be flustered, to falter in the face of legal procedure. But there was no trace of fear in his eyes, no sign of uncertainty in his demeanor. In that moment, Judge Hughes realized something. She had underestimated him. The laughter in the room, once easy and carefree, was replaced with an uncomfortable stillness. No one was laughing now. Michael Jordan wasn't here to entertain. He wasn't here for show. He was here because he believed in what was right, and he would fight for it no matter the arena. Judge Hughes, for the first time since entering the courtroom, found herself in a rare position, unsure. She cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "Very well, Mr. Jordan," she said, her voice losing some of its earlier mockery. "You may proceed." Michael gave a small nod, his face unreadable, but the shift in the room was undeniable. The courtroom, which had once seen him as a figure of amusement, was now starting to see him as a force to be reckoned with. And this was only the beginning. Michael Jordan's calm response and evidence presentation, the power of preparation. As Judge Hughes reluctantly cleared her throat and allowed Michael to proceed, the room shifted. The moment that had seemed filled with mockery and doubt now seemed to carry a weight of anticipation. The chuckles that had once echoed throughout the courtroom had all but disappeared. Now the only sound was the quiet rustling of papers, the soft scribbling of pens, and the occasional shifting of chairs. Michael Jordan had earned the room's undivided attention. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism, was now immersed in a quiet, almost reverent silence. His composed demeanor wasn't that of a man unprepared. Quite the opposite. It spoke of someone who had taken the time to understand every nuance of this case. Someone who had, in his own way, trained for this moment as relentlessly as he had trained for any championship. The evidence he presented wasn't just proof. It was a testimony to his unwavering dedication. He wasn't here for show. This wasn't a performance, and certainly it wasn't a game. It was real, and he was going to make them understand that. With the calm precision of a man who had faced high-pressure situations all his life, Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of neatly organized documents. He laid them on the table with deliberate care, each page a carefully prepared argument, each document another step toward proving his case. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he let the papers settle. There was something deeply deliberate in the way he approached the situation. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. He began with the first page, his voice low, steady, and unwavering. "In 2000, I purchased a piece of land in Chicago," he started, his words cutting through the room with quiet authority. It wasn't just any piece of land. It was an investment in peace, a place to retreat from the chaos of the world, a place that I could call my own. The boundaries were clear, the deeds were signed, and I've paid my taxes on it every year since. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism, was now watching intently. The first seeds of doubt had been planted in their minds. Michael Jordan wasn't speaking with the arrogance they'd expected. Instead, he was speaking from experience, from knowledge, and above all, from the truth. This wasn't a man who was out of his depth. He knew exactly what he was talking about. And the more he spoke, the more it became apparent he was not just defending a piece of land. He was defending his right to live peacefully, to protect what was his. He pulled out the next document, an aerial photograph of his property. The image, clear and sharp, showed the land as it had been before any construction had begun. "This is my land in 2021, he said, pointing at the image with a steady hand. His eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of every person there. "And this," he continued, pulling out another photo, "is my land after the construction began." The change was stark. The once clearly marked boundary line was now blurred, with parts of the developer's project spilling over into the territory that had once been his. A murmur rippled through the room. The audience, the judge, even the defense team could no longer ignore what Michael was showing them. This wasn't a case of hearsay or hypothetical arguments. This was proof, unassailable, irrefutable evidence. And it was clear that Michael had prepared for this moment with a level of precision that only someone of his caliber could. Michael didn't rush through his presentation. Instead, he let each piece of evidence stand on its own, taking time to let the weight of each document sink in. "Here are the letters I sent to the developer," he said, placing another set of papers on the table. "They were ignored. And then I sent another and another, all of them asking for the same thing, that they stop construction on my land. But they didn't listen. They didn't respond." He paused, his eyes moving to the defense team. "They had every opportunity to do the right thing," he said, his voice low but firm. "But they chose not to." The defense attorney, Gregory Roberts, a man known for his confidence and poised arguments, had begun to look less sure of himself. He stood up quickly, his face contorting into a mockingly polite expression. "Your Honor," he interjected, clearly trying to regain control of the room. "Mr. Jordan has certainly done his homework, but let's not mistake his effort for expertise. The law is far more complex than a few photographs and some letters." But Michael wasn't having it. Without missing a beat, he raised a hand, cutting off the defense's attorney mid-sentence. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. It spoke volumes about his confidence and his refusal to let his case be dismissed by someone who didn't take it seriously. He looked directly at Gregory, his eyes unwavering. "I understand the law just fine," Michael replied, his tone unshaken, "and I understand when someone is breaking it." Gregory, who had been so certain of his superiority, paused. His smirk faltered. Michael was no longer the man who had walked into the room as a celebrity. He was a man on a mission, someone who had invested time, energy, and focus into this case. This was no longer a spectacle. It was a fight for what was right, and Michael Jordan was leading it with the kind of precision and discipline that had made him a legend on the court. Michael continued his methodical presentation, laying out each piece of evidence with care and clarity, knowing full well that his mastery wasn't just on the basketball court. It was here, in this courtroom, where his attention to detail and his relentless pursuit of excellence would see him through. Every piece of paper, every photograph, every letter was a reminder. Michael Jordan wasn't just a winner on the court. He was a winner in life, and today he would prove it. The defense attorney's reaction, underestimating the power of confidence. The silence that fell over the courtroom after Michael Jordan's firm and composed response was palpable. For the first time since the trial had begun, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Michael Jordan was not the man the defense attorney Gregory Roberts had expected. Roberts, with his tailored suit and polished demeanor, had entered this case with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. He had seen many high-profile individuals stumble in court, and he expected Michael to be no different. He had assumed that the legendary athlete, known for his talent on the court rather than in legal matters, would falter under the pressure. He thought it would be easy to poke holes in Jordan's case, to turn his knowledge of the law into an ill-constructed, amateurish defense. But now, standing before him, was a man whose presence radiated an undeniable strength. Michael wasn't faltering. In fact, he was far more prepared than anyone had anticipated. Gregory Roberts, who had been riding high on his belief that he would easily dismantle Jordan's case, was now visibly thrown off balance. He took a moment to compose himself, adjusting his suit jacket as if to maintain control of the situation. His confident smile was beginning to fade, replaced by the faintest trace of doubt. His earlier assumptions had been shattered. He had expected Michael to play the part of an out-of-his-league celebrity, but instead he was facing a man who was standing firm and commanding the courtroom with the precision of a skilled attorney. Robert stood up, trying to regain control of the moment. "Your Honor," he said, his voice still calm, though it lacked the self-assuredness it had carried moments before, "while I must acknowledge Mr. Jordan's dedication to preparing for this case, the law is not as simple as he seems to believe. Property disputes are filled with complexities, nuances that require not only a basic understanding of the legal framework, but also years of expertise in interpreting case law. Mr. Jordan," he added with a slight sneer, "may be a legend on the basketball court, but this isn't a game. This is real life, and here, a single misstep can be devastating." The words were sharp, calculated, designed to belittle, to remind Michael of the gap between his world of sports and the world of legal expertise. Roberts clearly believed that in this realm, his decades of experience would be enough to overpower Jordan's quiet confidence. He looked around the courtroom, searching for a sign of agreement from the jury, his colleagues, anyone who would reaffirm that his words still carried weight. He was met with nothing but silence, the eyes of everyone in the room fixed on him with increasing skepticism. Michael, however, didn't react with anger or even frustration. There was no flicker of doubt in his eyes. His expression remained composed, calm as ever. He didn't need to respond immediately. He simply let the silence stretch out, letting Robert's words hang in the air, serving as a reminder of the defense's underlying strategy, to undermine him, to convince the room that this was simply a spectacle. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was as steady as it had been from the beginning. "You're right, Mr. Roberts," he said, his tone measured but resolute. "This isn't a game, and it's certainly not something I'm taking lightly." He let those words sink in, allowing the room to feel the weight of them. The laughter, which had accompanied the earlier mockery, seemed to have evaporated. The audience was no longer laughing at Michael Jordan. They were listening. Even the judge, who had first seen this case as little more than an oddity, now leaned forward, her expression neutral, but no longer dismissive. Michael continued, unhurried, making his case with the same care and precision he used when he faced a shot clock on the court. "I may not be an attorney," he said, pulling another set of documents from his briefcase, "but I understand what it means to fight for what's right. I understand what it means to prepare, to learn, and to give everything you have when the stakes are high." The room grew still as Michael flipped through the pages, his movements slow but deliberate. Each document was a piece of the puzzle, a link in the chain of evidence that supported his claim. With the same level of attention he had given his basketball training, he had immersed himself in the study of property law. He knew the facts, the precedents, and the legal arguments that would strengthen his case, and in that moment it was clear to the room that his preparation, not his celebrity status, was the real force at work. The defense attorney, once so sure of himself, could do little more than stand there, his expression faltering as Michael continued to methodically present his case. Roberts had come into the courtroom with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat, but Michael was showing him something far more powerful, a quiet strength born not from ego, but from an unshakable commitment to his cause. As Michael finished laying out his evidence, the judge, who had initially dismissed him as a mere celebrity attempting to handle a legal battle, was now forced to reconsider her initial judgment. Michael Jordan wasn't out of his depth. He wasn't an amateur. He was a man who had approached this case with the same discipline, focus, and determination that had made him a legend on the court. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism and dismissive laughter, had fallen into a deep silence. For the first time, everyone realized that this wasn't just a high-profile spectacle. It was a serious fight, one that Michael Jordan was poised to win. And as the defense attorney stood there, his words lost in the quiet, it became clear. The only thing underestimated in this courtroom was Michael Jordan's ability to turn the tables. The shift in the room, a new kind of power. The change in the courtroom was subtle at first. It wasn't an immediate dramatic shift, but more of a slow, inevitable realization that crept in like the quiet spread of a wildfire. The laughter, once rampant and dismissive, had faded entirely. The chuckles that had followed Michael Jordan's entrance, the condescending whispers from the defense team, and the sarcastic remarks from the gallery were all gone, replaced by a thick silence that filled the room. The walls that had once seemed to hum with mocking energy now stood still, as though the very air itself was holding its breath. What had begun as an amusement, an opportunity for the courtroom to watch an athlete with no legal training flounder, had transformed into something far more serious. The laughter that had echoed when Michael first announced he would represent himself had dissipated, slowly replaced by the deepening realization that they had underestimated the man standing before them. It was no longer a court hearing with an NBA legend trying to make a point. It had become a battle, one that was far more intense than anyone had expected. Judge Eleanor Hughes, who had initially greeted Michael Jordan's decision with condescension, now found herself in a state of quiet contemplation. Her eyes, once amused and slightly skeptical, were now focused and alert. The shift in her demeanor wasn't immediate, but it was impossible to ignore. She had come into this case expecting to deal with a high-profitable theatrical spectacle. Instead, she was witnessing the calm, controlled strength of a man who was far more prepared than she had anticipated. There was something unmistakable about the way Michael carried himself, something that set him apart from the other celebrities and public figures who had walked into her courtroom over the years. His presence didn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It wasn't loud, brash, or overbearing. Instead, it was quiet and steady, like the force of a river carving through stone over time. It wasn't just his fame that made him stand out. It was his conviction, his belief in his cause, and his preparation. The defense team, led by Gregory Roberts, who had once been so confident, was now visibly rattled. His earlier attempts to belittle Michael Jordan's legal knowledge, his sarcastic remarks about Jordan's games on the court, had all been rendered meaningless by the cold, hard facts that Michael had laid out in front of them. Roberts, who had been so sure that this was a case he could easily win, now found himself scrambling to regain control. His arguments, once laced with confidence, now faltered. He was no longer looking at Michael Jordan as just an athlete in a suit, but as a formidable opponent in his own right. What was once a confident and self-assured defense team now found themselves on the defensive, their composure slipping as they realized that Michael wasn't going to allow them to dictate the pace of the trial. The energy in the room had changed. The defense's smirks were gone, replaced by furrowed brows and the occasional glance toward the judge, seeking reassurance that they hadn't miscalculated their strategy. But there was no reassurance to be found. As Michael continued to present his evidence, there was a steady, deliberate rhythm to his words. Each document he presented was more than just a piece of evidence. It was a statement of intent, a declaration that he wasn't going to let anyone take what was rightfully his without a fight. The legal documents, photographs, and correspondence were all a testament to the level of preparation Michael had invested in this case. But it wasn't just the paperwork that struck those in the room. It was the way Michael spoke with such unwavering certainty. It was as though every word had been chosen with the same care and precision he had applied to his basketball career. The room was silent as he methodically walked through each piece of evidence, the steady cadence of his voice punctuating the stillness. There was no flash, no dramatic flourish. There was only the quiet power of a man who had fought for greatness his entire life, and now he was fighting for something far more personal. And with every word he made it clearer that his fight wasn't about fame, wealth, or celebrity. It was about principle. It was about standing up for what was right. Judge Hughes, once skeptical of Michael's decision to represent himself, now watched him with a mixture of respect and admiration. She had seen countless cases in her time on the bench, but she had never seen anything quite like this. There was no doubt in her mind now. Michael Jordan was not just another celebrity playing at a legal battle. He was a man who had approached this case with the same discipline, focus, and determination that had made him a legend on the court, and that was a force that no one, no matter how experienced, could easily dismiss. The spectators in the courtroom, who had once been so eager to see Michael stumble, were now hanging on every word. They had come expecting a spectacle, expecting to watch a famous man fumble through a case he didn't understand. What they were witnessing instead was a man who had spent his life mastering one thing: the art of overcoming the impossible. And now he was using that mastery to take on something even greater than the basketball court: the legal system itself. As the defense team began to lose their footing, it became clear to everyone in the room, Michael Jordan was not the underdog here. He was the one in control. He had flipped the script, taken the reins, and turned the tables. The trial, which had started with laughter and mockery, was now a battle that Michael Jordan was destined to win. And the real shock wasn't the case he was presenting, it was the realization that he was far more than just a basketball legend. He was a force of nature, and this courtroom, for all its rules and procedures, was no match for his quiet determination. Public and media reaction, a new kind of hero. As the court session concluded for the day, the impact of what had just unfolded reverberated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. News vans, which had been parked outside the building for hours, erupted into a frenzy. Satellite dishes spun toward the sky, their signals capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. The buzz was palpable, a sensation that could be felt not just outside the courthouse, but throughout the city, the nation, and perhaps the world. What had begun as a high-profile, potentially trivial courtroom spectacle had quickly transformed into something far deeper, far more profound. The day's proceedings had exposed something no one had expected. Michael Jordan wasn't just an athlete playing at a legal battle. He wasn't an entertainer stepping into an unfamiliar world and hoping to make it through. He had proven to everyone watching, whether in the courtroom, on their phones, or through the countless news broadcasts, that he was a force to be reckoned with, not just on the basketball court, but in this battle for justice as well. In the past, public figures had tried to use their celebrity status to navigate the legal system, often stumbling along the way, their cases turning into media circuses. But Michael Jordan had done something entirely different. He had gone into this trial with the same dedication, focus, and drive that had made him an icon in sports. He had spent months researching property law, learning the intricacies of zoning codes and legal precedents. He wasn't there to create a spectacle. He was there to win. By the time the trial had recessed, the news outlets were already broadcasting their updates. The headlines had practically written themselves. The morning's predictions that Michael Jordan would falter had given way to a completely different narrative. Michael Jordan's legal prowess stuns courtroom. Defense team left scrambling. From the court to the courtroom, Michael Jordan proves there's no challenge too great. The words that filled the evening broadcasts were full of awe and disbelief, as if the entire world had suddenly realized what those inside the courtroom already knew. Michael Jordan was far more than just a basketball legend. He was an extraordinary individual, someone whose discipline and commitment extended far beyond sports. The media coverage was relentless, and the public reaction was overwhelming. Social media exploded with commentary, the hashtag #MJInCourt trending worldwide. Clips from inside the courtroom began to surface, some taken illegally by eager spectators, showing Michael calmly and methodically presenting his case, while the defense team floundered. Legal analysts on TV debated the case, with some still questioning how a man with no formal legal training could be so prepared. Others, however, were full of admiration, commenting on his discipline and the way he commanded the room with the same presence that had made him a global icon. "Look," one analyst said on national television, "no one expected Michael Jordan to walk into this courtroom and actually know the law. But let's be honest, the man has done his homework. He's disciplined, precise, and commands that courtroom better than some lawyers I've seen." On the streets outside the courthouse, reporters approached anyone with a camera, asking if they had watched the trial unfold. People who had come to see the drama of a Hollywood legend trying his hand at the legal system found themselves talking instead about a man whose passion for justice had made him far more than just a celebrity in a suit. They had witnessed a champion not just in sports, but in the truest sense of the word. As Michael exited the courthouse that day, flanked by a sea of flashing lights and eager reporters, he was met with the kind of questions no one had expected. "Mr. Jordan," one reporter asked, "did you expect to make such a strong impression in court today?" His response was quiet, almost nonchalant, but it carried the weight of his character. "I didn't come here to impress anyone," he said, his eyes scanning the throng of reporters. "I came here to stand up for what's right." Another reporter, unable to resist, asked, "Do you really think you can win this case without a lawyer?" Michael paused, taking in the question as if it were just another challenge to be met. He looked directly into the camera. "Justice isn't about how much you pay your lawyer," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "It's about doing what's right. And that's what I'm here to do." The crowd was taken aback by the simplicity and the depth of his response. In those few words, Michael Jordan had said everything he needed to say. It wasn't about his fame or his wealth. It wasn't about playing a game or winning in the public eye. It was about principle. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity, no matter the arena. This was a man who had been tested over and over again in his career, and now he was facing another challenge, and winning in ways no one could have predicted. That night, the entire city was talking about the trial. On social media, people shared stories, memes, and videos from inside the courtroom. They expressed their awe, their respect, and in many cases, their surprise at the quiet strength Michael Jordan had displayed. The underdog story they had expected to witness had turned into something far more powerful, a real-life tale of determination, knowledge, and an unshakable belief in standing up for what's right. It wasn't about being a superstar. It was about being a person of integrity, someone willing to face difficult circumstances with the same level of commitment that had made him a legend on the basketball court. As the case continued, the media attention only grew, but it wasn't the celebrity spectacle they had anticipated. It was something far more profound. Michael Jordan, once considered a figure who played by his own rules on the court, had proven that those same rules could apply to every area of his life. And in the courtroom, as in basketball, Michael Jordan was showing the world that when it came to fighting for justice, he was just as unstoppable. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts.